Rafael Mendes, at 45 years old, was at the peak of his professional and personal life. His name was well known in various sectors of the economy. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a true icon of power and wealth in the corporate world. He didn't like to flaunt it, but the signs of his success were everywhere. A top-of-the-line convertible Mercedes, clothes from renowned brands, and a vast collection of watches that could easily cover the cost of a small house. His world was the empire he had created, and he saw himself as the center of that universe, able to control every aspect of his existence. That night, the winding road that stretched across the mountains seemed almost inviting. The city lights in the distance gave a disconcerting contrast to the darkness of the road, where the rain was starting to fall heavily, turning the dangerous curves into a challenge for any driver, even the most experienced. Rafael was tired. His body needed rest, but his mind couldn't stop working. Constant messages and calls from his business partners kept him busy. The pressure of solving crises and closing important deals was relentless, as if his life had no room for failure. He looked at his phone one more time, running his fingers over the screen, ignoring the sound of the rain and the noise of the car engine. The messages were piling up, each one more urgent than the last. By this point, Rafael no longer cared about the rain. He trusted his driving skills too much to worry about it. However, the tension in the air was palpable, and his tired body didn't react quickly enough when the curve appeared ahead. The speed was too high, and his reflexes had already been dulled by the demands of work. The impact was devastating. The car skidded, the guardrail tore like paper, and the Mercedes plummeted down the slope, spinning through the air before crashing into the trees and rocks of the mountain. The sound of metal twisting and glass shattering was muffled by the final crash of the car hitting the ground. Rafael was conscious, but the pain took over his body so intensely that there seemed to be no room left for fear. His face was bloodied, and his arms were pinned by the wreckage. His right leg was trapped between the twisted metal. The darkness of the night was dense and impenetrable, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. What terrified Rafael the most, however, wasn't the pain or discomfort, but the complete absence of any sound. He was alone, completely isolated. He tried to move, but his body was immobilized. The attempts to scream or call for help seemed futile, as if his voice was being swallowed by the emptiness around him. But then, in the middle of that loneliness and darkness, something extraordinary happened. Just as Rafael was about to lose hope, he saw a figure approaching through the mist that engulfed the road. At first, he thought it was a delirium, a hallucination caused by the trauma and pain. However, as the figure got closer, he realized he wasn't imagining it. It was real. It was a horse. But not just any horse. This one had an almost supernatural presence. Its coat was dark brown, almost black, and there was a white star on its forehead, a mark that shone in the darkness like a soft light. Its eyes, however, were what impressed Rafael the most. They conveyed a deep intelligence, a compassion that he had never seen in any other living being. The horse approached with a surprising calmness. There was no hurry in its movements, but something about it seemed to understand what Rafael needed. It began to move the debris around the businessman with impressive precision, using its hooves almost surgically, as if it were aware of every detail of what needed to be done. Rafael, still in shock, couldn't comprehend what was happening. A horse, an animal, was there, rescuing him. As absurd as it was, Rafael felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over his body. Even in his condition, he knew he wasn't alone anymore, and that someone, or something, was there to help him. The horse, with its quiet and impressive strength, began to pull him from the wreckage. Every movement, every gesture of the animal seemed like a promise of salvation. With difficulty, Rafael managed to lift himself onto the horse's shoulders, which carried him with a dexterity that he had never imagined an animal could possess. The pain was still intense, but there was something reassuring about the way the horse moved, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The night was still dark, but a sense of peace began to take over the businessman, as if the animal was a guide, not just for physical safety, but for something deeper that he couldn't yet understand. 4 hours, which seemed somewhat endless, Rafael was carried by the horse along an unknown road. He didn't know where he was being taken, but there was a growing trust in his chest. He believed in the horse. He trusted that this being, with its imposing presence and wise eyes, was leading him down a necessary path for his survival, not only physical but also spiritual. Finally, the horse stopped in front of a small wooden cabin, simple but welcoming. A soft smoke was rising from the chimney, and the light from the fireplace projected outward, warming the darkness. The door opened, and a figure emerged from the cabin. It was an elderly man, with white hair and a wrinkled face, but with a gaze that exuded deep wisdom. "Welcome," said the man, in a soft and welcoming voice. He helped Rafael off the horse, and without a word, led him into the cabin. The temperature inside was pleasant, and the fire crackled in the fireplace, bringing warmth and comfort. The man, who introduced himself as Jorge, asked Rafael to sit while he prepared a simple yet nourishing meal. Rafael was hungry, but not just physically. He felt a hunger for something more, a hunger he didn't know he had until that moment. While Rafael ate, Jorge watched him with an enigmatic smile. "You have a long journey ahead of you," he said, with a calmness that only time could bring. "But you're not alone. I'll be here to help you, and the horse. He is your guide. He brought you here for a reason." Rafael, still stunned by the experience, looked at the horse, which was calmly grazing outside the cabin. "Why did he do this?" he asked, emotion mixing with gratitude in his voice. To him, the horse was far more than just an animal. Jorge smiled and answered with a deep look, "Because you need to learn to see the world in a different way. The horse is a teacher, but you need to be willing to learn." These words began to reverberate in Rafael's mind, and he started to realize that this experience wasn't just about surviving the accident, but about reconnecting with himself. His body was injured, but the true healing he needed was in his soul. He didn't know yet what the future held for him, but he was ready to embark on the journey that the horse and Jorge were offering him. Rafael's journey was just beginning. The process of healing, both physical and emotional, would be long and challenging. However, with Jorge's wisdom and the presence of the horse, he would soon begin to discover the true meanings of life, nature, and the connection between all living beings. And thus would begin Rafael's transformation, a man who had lived for success and wealth, but who would now be guided by something much greater, the true essence of life. After a few hours of rest in Jorge's cabin, Rafael woke up to the soft morning light filtering through the cracks in the wooden window. The pain in his body was still present, but now it was bearable. The simple yet nourishing food and the warmth of the fireplace had given him the energy needed to face what was to come. However, his mind was restless. Jorge's words lingered in his thoughts, and he felt as though he was on the edge of something immense, but still invisible. Rafael slowly got up, feeling the stiffness in his legs and arms, and walked to the door. The fresh morning air filled his lungs, bringing a sense of clarity. The horse, now closer, had its head lowered, chewing on some grass, but its eyes still shone with that mysterious presence. "He's not just a horse, is he?" Rafael asked, still uncertain, although he was starting to sense something supernatural about the creature. Jorge, standing at the door of the cabin and watching him, smiled with an understanding look. "He's more than that," Jorge replied. "This horse has a deep connection with nature, with the universe. He has the ability to see beyond the obvious, to sense the energies around us. He was chosen to be your guide. And you, Rafael, were chosen to walk this path." Rafael looked at the horse and, for the first time, felt a true sense of gratitude, not only for saving his life but for something deeper, as if his soul were connected to the essence of this creature. "But why me?" Rafael asked, still questioning. "What makes me special enough to be chosen?" Jorge looked at him seriously, almost as if he had been waiting for that question. "You have a successful life, that's true. But what you haven't noticed is that, despite everything, you're empty inside. You live for work, for power, but you're losing something vital in the process. The horse, he represents freedom, connection with the natural world, and most of all, the deep understanding of oneself. You'll need to learn from him, but also from yourself." Those words hit Rafael like a punch to the gut. He always considered himself accomplished, with everything anyone could want. A successful career, a respected family, influential friends. But as he reflected on the life he led, something inside him told him Jorge was right. He was empty. What was he really seeking? Power, wealth, or something deeper and more fulfilling? Without answering immediately, Rafael followed Jorge outside, where the horse was waiting patiently. The old man motioned for him to mount. Rafael hesitated for a moment. The idea of entrusting his life to a horse again, after the accident, seemed almost ironic. But something inside him, an almost instinctive feeling, pushed him to act. He climbed on, though with difficulty, still recovering from the accident, but the horse seemed to understand every movement of his body, adjusting to him gently. "Let's begin the journey," Jorge said as he walked toward the forest ahead of them. "Today, the horse will be your guide. He'll show you the way, but you must stay aware of everything around you. The true journey isn't just walking, it's perceiving." Rafael's journey with the horse began along a winding path that led into the dense forest. The towering trees formed a natural canopy, casting a shadow that seemed to envelop everything around him. The sound of dry leaves crunching beneath the horse's hooves and the distant song of birds were the only noises that broke the deep silence of the forest. Rafael felt a sense of calm, but also strangeness, as if he were entering a completely different world than the one he knew. With each step, it felt as though he was being drawn into a new state of awareness, as if the forest itself was communicating with him. It was as if the trees, the earth, the wind, all had a presence, an energy Rafael had never noticed before. It felt like they were embracing him, but also challenging him. The horse moved with firm, precise steps, and Rafael, still a little tense, held onto the reins tightly. He didn't know what he was expecting to find in this forest, but he knew it was something important. Jorge walked ahead without rushing, almost as if he knew exactly what was going to happen. After a while, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a large rock, and around it, the air seemed denser, charged with a strange energy. The horse stopped and stared at the rock intently. Rafael felt his heart beat faster, as if something was about to happen. "This is the stone of reflection," Jorge said, breaking the silence. "Here you must reflect on your life. Look inside yourself and ask what it is you really desire. The horse has brought you here, but now it's up to you to take the next step." Rafael dismounted, feeling the weight of Jorge's words. He looked at the rock, and with an almost automatic gesture, sat in front of it. The sounds of the forest faded, and he became immersed in his thoughts. Jorge's words echoed in his mind. "What do you truly desire?" He closed his eyes and tried to recall everything he had accomplished in his life. The empire he had built, the contracts signed, the trips abroad, the elegant dinners, and the meetings. But something, an indescribable feeling, made him question whether any of it had any real meaning. He'd always thought success was the answer to everything, but now, in that moment, he wasn't sure of anything. For long minutes, Rafael remained there, lost in his thoughts, until, slowly, something inside him began to shift. He realized that what he truly sought wasn't more power or wealth, but a genuine connection with the world around him. He wanted to understand himself, to make peace with what he had done and what he could still do. But most of all, he wanted to be free. Free to follow his own path, not the one society or business had laid out for him. "I understand," Rafael said softly, as if speaking to himself. The horse, which had been standing beside him, lowered its head, as if it understood what was happening in his mind. It was as if it had been waiting for this moment. Jorge watched everything in silence, but his subtle smile was enough for Rafael to understand that he had taken the first step. After spending a few more nights at Jorge's cabin, Rafael found himself reflecting deeply on the lessons he had learned. Jorge didn't pressure him to make drastic changes, but encouraged him to continue his journey of self-discovery. The horse, as always, was present, watching over him and guiding him, whether on walks through the forest or during quiet moments of meditation. As the days passed, Rafael began to feel an internal transformation, though a part of him still remained divided. He knew that soon, he would have to return to the real world, the world he knew so well. The world of business, meetings, contracts, and expectations. He understood that the true journey was not just in the forest, but in how he would apply what he had learned to his everyday life. One morning, Rafael woke with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. During the past days at Jorge's cabin, he had come to know himself better, meditating alongside the horse and listening to the old man's wise words. Yet, in the back of his mind, there remained a doubt, like a distant echo. How can I apply everything I've learned to the world I'm going back to? The business world, the contracts, the pressures of his old life seemed farther away, but at the same time, the idea of letting go of everything he had worked for seemed impossible. The truth was, though he had found something deeper within himself, he was still trapped in the system he had built. That morning, Jorge invited him for a walk through the forest. He knew the young man didn't feel ready to return yet and needed more time to internalize the lessons both he and the horse had taught him. But still, It was inevitable that, at some point, Rafael would have to decide what to do with the new knowledge he had gained. As they walked along a narrow path, Jorge, with his usual wisdom, began to speak about the nature of choices. Life is made up of choices, Rafael. You have the power to create your own destiny, but true freedom doesn't come from external options. It comes from inner peace with what you choose. The outside world will never change, but the way you react to it will. Those words sounded like a call, but Rafael still felt an internal resistance. He knew he needed to change, but the idea of leaving behind the comfort of his old life, of letting go of what he had worked for so long, terrified him. After several days of reflection, Rafael felt he was more prepared. Jorge, noticing the change in his demeanor, gave him one final piece of advice before his departure. Remember what you learned here. The horse will always be with you, but true wisdom lies in how you handle the world you cannot control. You don't have to change everything at once, but don't lose yourself in external pressures. Keep your connection to yourself. The farewell was silent. Rafael looked at the horse one last time, and it seemed to understand that the moment to part had come. The old man handed him a small amulet, something simple, but with profound meaning. Carry this with you. Every time you feel lost, look at it and remember the journey you've taken. With the amulet in his hands, Rafael began his journey back to the real world. The road back to his old life seemed long and barren, but something inside him had changed. He didn't know exactly what he would find when he returned, but he knew that what was to come would be different. He would not return the same man who had left. Upon returning to the city, Rafael was immediately confronted by the avalanche of commitments and responsibilities he had left behind. Work meetings, client demands, family pressures, everything seemed to welcome him back as if it had been waiting for him. But something inside him had shifted. The world around him was still the same, yet he was more at peace, more centered. Every meeting, every business decision, was made with a new perspective. In one of the most important meetings of his career, with investors from an international company, Rafael noticed the difference. He wasn't trying to please or impress anyone anymore. He was there because he believed in what he was saying, believed in what he was doing. He spoke more clearly, more authentically. Jorge's words echoed in his mind during the meeting. You don't need to change the world, Rafael. You need to change the way you see it. In that meeting, instead of seeking approval, Rafael focused on being honest with his intentions. And in the end, the investors, who had always been cold and calculating, showed genuine interest in his vision. This made him realize that often, the biggest obstacle in our lives is not the outside world, but the internal barriers we create ourselves. In the following days, Rafael began practicing meditation daily, something he had learned from Jorge. He also started dedicating more time to nature, taking walks and finding moments of silence to reconnect with himself. One afternoon, while walking through a wooded area on the outskirts of the city, Rafael felt something strange, a sense of presence. He looked around and, for a moment, thought he saw something out of the corner of his eye. And then he saw it. The horse. It was there, in an open field, head held high and eyes fixed on Rafael. It was no longer in the field near Jorge's cabin, but Rafael knew, without a doubt, that the horse was there for him, as if the bond they had formed in the forest was eternal. Without hesitation, Rafael approached the horse and, in a spontaneous gesture, placed his hand on its neck. The horse turned its head as if recognizing Rafael's presence, and he felt a wave of warmth and connection. It wasn't a physical connection, but a deep, spiritual one, as if they had completed a mission together and, in some way, shared the same energy. There, in that moment, Rafael understood that the journey didn't end with Jorge's departure or his return to the business world. The true journey was internal, and the horse, just like Jorge, would always be with him, guiding him, reminding him of his true essence. Over time, Rafael began to naturally apply what he had learned in his daily life. The external pressures didn't disappear, but the way he faced them changed. He no longer reacted to the demands of the world. Instead, he responded with a new, calmer perspective. In conversations with his work team, he became more open and vulnerable, allowing others to share their visions and challenges. Instead of seeking control, he began to seek collaboration, creating a more harmonious environment around him. He also made sure to share his journey with those around him, inspiring them to seek something more meaningful in their own lives. He knew that true wisdom wasn't about having everything under control, but knowing when to surrender to what life offers and trust that the path would always reveal itself to those brave enough to seek it. Rafael was no longer the same. The horse, Jorge, the forest, and all the lessons he had learned during the journey had transformed him. Life continued, but now he was at peace with himself. The horse that had guided him in the forest now guided him in his mind and daily decisions. And he knew that no matter where life took him, he would always have the inner strength to face any challenge.